Hi guys, it's Alonzo again, back with another video as promised. Today we're going to make a delicious dessert that will definitely knock the socks off of your guests at your next party and make it the star of the show. It's called Creme Brulee. Very simple to make with just a few ingredients. The only thing you have to pay attention to is a little bit of a technique or procedure. Other than that, very simple and delicious to make. So the basic ingredients for a good creme brulee is literally just 4 ingredients. 4 ingredients. We're going to start with pure, heavy whipping cream. It has to say heavy cream or heavy whipping cream. I'll tell you the difference. All cream is at least 18% milk fat. Anything labeled whipping cream is at least 30% milk fat. And anything labeled heavy cream or heavy whipping cream has to contain at least 36% milk fat. Obviously, the more milk fat, the richer and luxurious your creme brulee will be. So I recommend getting heavy whipping cream or heavy cream. It's got to have the word heavy in there for that 36% milk fat. The next ingredient in our creme brulee is going to be granulated white sugar, which we're going to use to sweeten the creme brulee. Third ingredient in the creme brulee is pure vanilla extract. Now, I usually use a Madagascar vanilla from Mexico. Very delicious vanilla. At this point I don't have any, so I've got a little bit of McCormick pure vanilla extract as opposed to the imitation. I think the pure vanilla extract really retains much more flavor than the imitation, where the imitation contains a lot of alcohol, which evaporates and diminishes along with its flavor. And then the last and final ingredient, obviously, we're going to use some eggs, but we're only going to use the egg yolk of the egg. We're not going to use the egg white. We're not going to discard the egg whites. We're going to save those to make egg white omelets or scrambled egg whites or even meringues. But for the creme brulee, we're just going to use the yolk of the egg. So we're going to start off by separating. We're going to need 12 egg yolks for this recipe. I'll put the recipe in a description of the video in the description section below. So if you're looking at my video from the app, the YouTube app on your phone, there should be a little drop down area where you can click on it. It'll give you a description of the video, and there as well I'll place the recipe. But we're going to need some egg yolks, so we're going to take the egg, tap it on the counter, and I've washed my hands. And you can use an egg separator, which separates the whites from the yolk. But in this case, we're going to use our hands. Our hands are the most important tool in the kitchen, very versatile. So what you can do is you can crack the egg in half and pull the top off. And then you can just pour the egg right into your hand and just sort of open your fingers a little bit, and you'll see the egg whites just drop right through and the yolk stays right in your hand. That's basically what an egg separator does that you can buy over at Jewel or Target or Walmart, and just go back and forth in your hands and just let the egg white run between your fingers and just give it a squeeze. Any little bit will then just get cut off and transferred over your hands. So now we have a pure egg yolk. So I'm going to do one more to show you. I'm going to tap it on the counter, and always tap it on a flat surface. If you tap it on the edge of the bowl or a sharp edge like that, it's going to push the shell inside of the egg and puncture your yolk. You don't want it to do that. This way it just sort of cracks it, and then you just pull it right apart gently, trying not to pierce the yolk, because all we want is the yolk here, not the white. Here in this case I dropped it into my whites, but I want to save those whites for something else. So again, I'm just letting the white run through my fingers, and then I'm squeezing together and it's cutting the white off. And again, I'm just transferring it over one more time, and then we've got the pure egg yolk. Alright, so now that we've got the yolk separated from the whites, we've got them in a bowl here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to break them, and I'm going to give them just a light beating. I don't want to beat them too heavy because I'm not trying to incorporate air into this, into the egg yolks or the mixture for that matter, because again we want a nice smooth velvety creme brulee and not a foamy air pockety creme brulee, if that's even a word. But as you can see, I'm just stirring them and they're coming together real nice, and this is just pure egg yolks. So what we're doing here now is we're going to place our heavy whipping cream inside of a double boiler. This actually should have been the first step of the video to give it a head start before we did anything else. but I'm just going to go ahead and show you guys now. But for this recipe, we're using 6 cups, and again, I'll have the recipe in the description. But 1 whole quart of cream, which is 4 cups, is going to go into a double boiler. This here is our homemade double boiler. And a double boiler basically is a bowl sitting above a pot with about 1 inch or 2 of water inside, just at a simmer or a little higher to create some steam. Now what this does is gives us the ability to scald or heavy cream without the possibility of scorching it, because we're using steam as opposed to direct heat. So we're going to go ahead and put 1 whole quart into the double boiler over the steam to get that started. As you can see, heavy whipping cream, 36% milk fat, nice, rich, thick, delicious. Hey, nobody said this was a diet creme brulee, right? And then we're going to measure out 2 more cups. 2 more cups of heavy cream for a total of 6. And again, the recipe will be in the description. And pour that right into our double boiler. You can see that heavy cream is so rich that it actually coats the side of the measuring cup there. They call that nappe. The heavy cream is naturally thick there, rich and delicious. Now we're scalding the heavy cream because it also helps to keep the creme brulee pretty stable while it's under refrigeration. If we were to try and go ahead and make this creme brulee without scalding the cream first, there's more of a risk of the creme brulee actually breaking down and turning watery if we don't scald it than if we do. I'm not sure exactly what the chemical process is there or what actually happens, but it's happened before where the milk or the cream wasn't properly scalded and the creme brulee has gotten watery. So we're going to pour the creme brulee batter into these little 4-ounce ramekins I have here. Now these are 4-ounce disposable aluminum ramekins that I bought at a restaurant supply store. I'm not sure if they sell these like at a Target or Walmart or wherever the case may be, but it is a disposable aluminum 4-ounce ramekin. Now if you can't find these at your local store, you can go ahead and purchase some ceramic ones about the same size, if not a little bigger or a little smaller. I wouldn't recommend going too much bigger than 4 ounces, 6 ounces maybe, 8 ounces max. And the reason I say that is because if it's deep like this, the custard will have a tendency to overcook around the edges before the center is actually done, and we don't want that to happen. We want it to cook evenly. So if you're going to go deep dish, you know, like this is actually a very good size for creme brulee because it's just enough but not too much, because again, creme brulee is very rich. Sometimes recipes will call for long oval shaped dishes which are a little shallower and really spread out so you have more surface to air ratio, and what that helps is the actual cooking time may take a little less and it'll cook a lot more even, but you can still get away with nice even cooking in a 4-ounce ramekin like this. And again, it's still a pretty decent sized portion for creme brulee, but not overdoing it and not underdoing it by any means. Again, if you can't find these aluminum disposable 4-ounce ramekins, you can definitely purchase some ceramic ramekins at your local Target or Walmart or arts and crafts store. Will have them also. And we're going to place our ramekins in a shallow baking dish so we can surround these in a water bath, what's called also a bain-marie in the cooking industry, in the culinary industry. The idea behind this is to cook these submerged in water at the level of our custard to keep the edges from scorching or burning or cooking too fast before the center of the custard is actually cooked through. So you want a nice dish high enough to hold enough water to where you're not going to tip it over and spill it, number one, and number two, enough to come up nice and high on the sides of each ramekin. So as you can see, I've got them here in a 9x13 casserole, or a hotel pan, or otherwise known in layman's term, a lasagna pan will work. But a 9x13 casserole dish like this will work depending on how many you're making. Now you can also cut this recipe in half. Like I said, I'll have the recipe in the description of the video. But again, a 9x13 pan will work for this this recipe. I'm actually using two pans, a 9x13 and then one just a little smaller that I have set up there in the back. I have never made I've never made this recipe this small before, so I don't know exactly how many I'm going to get out of it. But once I start pouring them, I'll have an idea, and if I need to go ahead and fill more of these casserole dishes with these cups, then I will, or if I need less, I'll just take them out. So we're scalding the cream and the double boiler, and as you can see, there's steam coming off of the spoon now, and from the heavy cream that I've got here in the double boiler, and we're scalding it. That's a nice scalded heavy cream there. Obviously you don't want it to simmer or boil, which it may not because it's sitting over steam and we've got it on a low heat, but you can see it's nice and hot. I don't know if you can see in the camera shot, but there's steam coming off of the spoon and the bowl. So once we've got that, once we've achieved that steam, that nice cream is nice and scalded, we're going to go ahead and stir in our granulated sugar. Once again, the recipe will be in the description. We're going to go ahead and give that a stir until our granulated sugar is completely dissolved in our cream. And then after adding the granulated sugar, we're going to go ahead and shut it off. We're going to remove it from the heat. And being very careful because number one, the steam can burn you when you're taking the bowl off of the double boiler, so use a nice dry towel, not a wet towel. If you use a wet towel when you're handling hot items, the moisture in the towel will transfer the heat faster from whatever vessel, hot vessel you're touching to your hand a lot faster than a dry towel will. A dry towel, make sure it's nice and dry, nice and thick, and not light. You can handle hot items for a good amount of time without burning yourself. So pull it right off of the steam. We're going to go ahead and set that on our counter. Now the reason I'm doing this is I want to stop the heating process because at this point I want to stir in our vanilla extract right into our hot heavy cream. And I don't want this to continue heating over the steam because the longer you keep it over heat, the more it will dissipate the vanilla. Vanilla, like I said, does contain alcohol. The imitation vanillas contain a ton of alcohol. Pure vanilla extract still contains some, but we want to keep that nice strong vanilla flavor, so we don't want to keep cooking it any longer or heating it any longer. We just want to go ahead and stir in that sugar and vanilla. Now some recipes will also say to store the granulated sugar into the egg yolks. That's also a possibility here. You can go ahead and stir the granulated sugar into the egg yolks if you had to. And what that does is it sort of protects the egg yolks, because what we're going to do now is we're going to incorporate some of the hot cream into the yolks. We want to incorporate this all together for a final product, but we need to bring the temperature of the eggs up a little bit by tempering them. And what I mean by tempering is I'm going to go ahead and add some of this hot cream into our yolks a little at a time while constantly stirring to bring the temperature of those egg yolks up. Because if we were to go ahead and pour this hot cream into those yolks, or those yolks into the hot cream, those egg yolks are going to basically turn into scrambled eggs, and we don't want that. We want a nice, smooth, velvety finish. So again, you could stir the granulated sugar into your softly beaten egg yolks. Again, don't beat them too hard because you don't want to introduce air. But you can go ahead and introduce the sugar to the egg yolks, and that will help protect the egg yolks a little bit to keep you from making the mistake of scrambling them. In the beginning of the video, that's what I talked about. Is it's more, as you can see, it's just 4 ingredients, but it's more of a technique and procedure at this point, and being careful that not to scramble your egg yolks. So again, we're just going to introduce some of this hot cream now that we have the sugar and vanilla in. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these spoons here. Actually, I'm going to keep the one in the yolk because we want to stir the yolk. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take some of this hot cream mixture and I'm going to add it to our egg yolks. And I'm just going to do it a little at a time, briskly stirring our yolks. And this is called tempering. This is called tempering. We're raising the temperature of the yolks, so when we do finally pour the rest of these yolks into the cream, they won't scramble or turn into scrambled eggs, basically, or or cook on us. So as you can see, we're just incorporating it slowly, and that's slowly bringing up the temperature of the egg yolk. As you can see, the egg yolks are not scrambling or cooking. They are, in a sense, cooking because you can see it's nice and thick, but they are not turning into a big curdled chunky mess. So we're going to add a little more of the hot cream. Constantly stirring. We can go a little faster now since we've already got some hot cream in there. And we're going to go ahead and just add just a little more, again briskly stirring the whole time. Now that has raised the temperature of our egg yolks, so now we can go ahead and introduce the yolk mixture into the rest of the heavy cream that has the vanilla and sugar in it. And again, we're going to do so by constantly stirring and pouring in slowly. And as you can see, we are getting some bubbles, no big deal. I'll show you how to handle that as we start to pour them into the ramekins. Make sure we get all our yolk mixture. And there you have it, nice and smooth creme brulee batter. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and strain it. Now, we're going to go ahead and strain it. Although we were careful not to introduce the yolks to the hot cream or vice versa in a manner too fast to where they scrambled, but we're still going to deal with the little bits and pieces of the eggs. If you notice, when I was separating the egg yolks from the whites, you'll also see that little white speck in there. Well, sometimes that goes into the yolks also, or you get a little bit of white in there. And we want to end up with a beautiful, silky, velvety, rich, creamy creme brulee, as opposed to you biting down on something chunky or thick or something that may have cooked or curdled during the cooking process. So even though we were careful, we're going to go ahead and strain this through a fine mesh strainer. So we're going to pour it into the fine mesh strainer now. Again, we're just going to get any bits and pieces of white, egg white, or that little white particle that may have gotten into the yolks when we were separating them. And as you can see here, I've got a fine mesh strainer set over a Tupperware container, and I want to strain it into a container that I'm going to use to actually pour the batter into the ramekins. So I'm using a Tupperware container. Obviously it's not going to hold this quantity, but I'm going to do it in a couple of batches. But I want something with a corner or a pour spout or even a pitcher will work, because I'm going to use that same vessel then to pour it into the ramekins. So I'm just going to go ahead and pour our batter. And this batter again is the hot cream with the sugar, the vanilla, and the egg yolks. So here we go. We're just going to pour that right through the strainer, and I'll show you if there is any bits and pieces. Now I don't want to go too high here. Again, I'm going to do it in several batches as I'm pouring it into the ramekins. But as you can see, I'm going to lift this. And at this point we did very well actually, because there's no bits and pieces that actually got caught in the strainer. All it caught was basically air bubbles, and you can see we're just left with a nice, rich, velvety creme brulee batter. Creme brulee batter is now going into the ramekins. One variation of this recipe, and you'll hear me say that a lot in my different videos with different recipes. I'm going to give you some little tips and deviations from the recipe, but here we're making a plain creme brulee. I've also made these creme brulees where you can drop a couple of chocolate chips at the bottom of each ramekin, or buy a block of chocolate and just chop it up and go right into the bottom of each ramekin. A semi-sweet dark chocolate goes very well in here. My wife doesn't prefer the semi-sweet chocolate, so when I usually make them with chocolate, I'll make them with semi-sweet, or I'm sorry, with milk chocolate. But otherwise, I believe she prefers them plain. But here today we're making plain creme brulee. But again, you can put chocolate at the bottom of each ramekin. I prefer you buy a little block of chocolate and break it up in larger chunks, just to keep those larger pieces at the bottom of the creme brulee. The chocolate chips do work well, but some of them do end up floating to the top and you can see them. But otherwise, if you use chocolate chunks, if you buy a nice chunk of dark chocolate or milk chocolate and chop it up yourself into semi-large pieces, you can place it at the bottom of each ramekin and not worry about them floating to the top. But as you can see now, we're making plain ones, so I'm going to go ahead and pour the batter into each ramekin. Now, if you had chocolate in the bottom of the ramekin, obviously you wouldn't use as much batter, so you'll get a few extra creme brulee out of the batch. But you want to go just right to the very, very top of these ramekins. They're not going to puff up. They're not going to boil over. So you want them nice and full. We've got the creme brulee batter and the ramekins, as you can see now, in the 9x13 pan, and then the smaller one also. Out of this recipe, we got about 14 very full 4-ounce creme brulee. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add some hot water to the 9x13 pan. Now I recommend you guys do this after you put it in the oven. You can bring your oven rack forward, set your 9x13 pan in there, and then add your water to your pan so you're not fumbling it as you're putting it in the oven. I'm pretty used to it, so I'm going to go ahead and do it from here. And you want to just pour the water into the 9x13 pan, being careful not to get it into your creme brulees. And you want that water to come up at least 3/4 of the way up of the creme brulee, if not almost to the top, but not all the way to the top, because you don't want to fumble it as you're taking it in and out of the oven. But you will lose some of that water to evaporation in the oven, so you want to go about 3/4, if not a little higher. And again, the purpose of the water bath is to slow the cooking time down around the sides of the creme brulee, so the sides or the edges of the creme brulee do not overcook or cook before the center of the creme brulee is actually done. So as you can see, we've got them in the oven, and I've positioned that rack in the oven at about almost the highest level. You want to stay towards the top of the oven. You don't want to cook them too close to the bottom of the oven where the heat source is. Unfortunately, those tend to cook a lot faster or start to brown faster rather than cook nice and slow because they're closer to the heat. So I try to cook them towards the very top of the oven, or at least 3/4 of the way up in the oven, so they cook evenly. And if I was making more, I still wouldn't use that bottom rack, only because they tend to overcook too fast on that bottom rack because they're closer to the heat source. Now, another thing I wanted to point out is the fact that I'm using a conventional oven as opposed to a convection oven. Now, some of you may or may not know the difference between a conventional and a convection oven, but here is a conventional oven, which is typically the regular home oven. A conventional oven does not use forced hot air. It's still hot air. There's basically a heat source at the bottom of the oven, obviously, that gets hot, brings the oven up to temperature from the bottom. And a convection oven uses forced hot air. Now, a convection oven cooks a lot faster than a conventional oven, but in this case, we want a conventional oven because we don't want that hot air blowing around to make those creme brulees brown. A nice traditional creme brulee is a custard that is cooked just until it's set and it's still nice and pale yellow custardy. You don't want it to start getting color on the top. If you start getting a little color on the top, no big deal, but you don't want them to brown, you just want them to set. A convection oven is great for doing that if you're roasting meats and etc. and you want that nice crust, but we're not looking for that here. We're looking for a nice low and slow cook process for this creme brulee. As you can see on the oven here, I've got the oven set to 325 degrees, and again, it's a conventional oven, not a convection oven. So if you have a stove or an oven at home where you can select whether you want the fan on or fan off, or conventional or convection, you want it on the conventional setting because again, you want that nice low and slow even heat. Now, I've got my oven set at about 325, and these are going to take approximately about an hour, maybe a little longer, maybe a little less. It all depends on your oven at home. A lot of home ovens are not properly calibrated, or they don't cook evenly. So you want to keep an eye on these, and you want to go nice and slow. I can go a little hotter and go a little faster and rush this if I wanted to. But the issue then becomes is if your oven is not cooking evenly, the creme brulees in the rear may start to cook faster or even brown before the ones in the front. And we're going to run into the issue where we're going to have to spin them, then or rotate them. And if you remember, we're cooking them in a water bath, so it becomes a little dangerous and cumbersome to try and rotate them in the oven while there's hot water in there. So you want to avoid doing that. So I set the oven at about 325 degrees. We're going to set a timer for about 45 minutes, and we're going to take a peek at them, and we're going to see how far along they went. Right around, I set it for 45 minutes, and I know they're not going to be done at that point, but at least it'll give me an idea of how close they actually are. To test to see if the creme brulee is done, I'm not going to use a knife method as you would a cake. I'm going to use the jiggle method. Yeah, jiggle like my belly, right? Make the joke. But I'm going to use the jiggle method, and what I want to see is, I want to see the mass of that creme brulee move together like a soft jello rather than water, a puddle of water. We want to just see it move together as a mass. That way we know that those egg yolks and that cream have come together, and we're going to stop it at that point. We're going to shut the oven off, and we're going to let them sit in the oven for probably another 10 or 15 minutes. Number one, so they can continue cooking just a little more. Number two, to let that hot water cool off so we don't burn ourselves when we take the pans out of the oven by spilling hot water on ourselves. You'll see here I've taken them out of the oven now, and I've been dealing with the thermostat on my oven not being as calibrated as I thought it was, and I failed to remember that I've been dealing with that issue. So as you can see, they got a little color, and traditionally creme brulee is supposed to cook up nice and pale, absolutely no color, but as you can see, the oven did get a little hot here. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but obviously in the restaurant business, for presentation purposes, the creme brulee is just supposed to be nice and set and still pale. So they did get a little color here, no big deal. Again, it's going to be trial and error in your oven. If your oven is pretty calibrated, you can go low and slow on these and check them a little earlier so you don't run into this problem, which I should have done in this situation, and I didn't. Shame on me. But you can go, let's say 300 degrees as opposed to 325 degrees at slightly above the middle rack in your oven for about, I would check them after about 35 minutes. And again, you're just looking for a little jiggle. Now these are still sitting in hot water, so I'm going to be real careful here. But as you can see, they just jiggle as one large mass. Now these were probably done 8 or 10 minutes, about 8 minutes prior to me taking them out. So they were done 8 minutes earlier. I could have pulled them out a lot earlier, and they would still be nice and set. They just started to get some color here, but these were probably done 8 minutes ago, and they should have come out of the oven. As you can see, they jiggle as a mass as opposed to like a cup of water or a puddle of water, and that's what you want to see. Now I recommend refrigerating these for a minimum 6 hours, letting them cool, and then refrigerating them for a minimum of 6 hours, but preferably overnight. You want that custard to set really nice so it becomes nice and smooth and creamy and cold and delicious. One less step for these creme brulees would be the brulee part. Once these have chilled and they're ready to be served, we sprinkle these with a little bit of sugar in the raw or granulated sugar, and we take a little butane torch and just torch the top of these creme brulees, and that'll be in the following segment. So now that the creme brulee has set, we stuck some in the freezer just to get it to cool a little bit faster. It's still not quite super set. As you can see, it's a lot set than what it was when it came out of the oven. But again, I highly recommend that you guys let these sit overnight in the refrigerator. Let them cool and then place them in the refrigerator overnight so they completely set and they become really luxurious and creamy. So here I have a butane torch. I purchased this nozzle that you can buy at any Williams-Sonoma, Crate and Barrel, places like that. Maybe even Walmart or Target, I'm sure. That goes right on top of these butane fuel canisters, which are very inexpensive at your hardware store or again the camping section at Walmart. So you just place the torch down there, give it a twist, and then this one, some of them have automatic triggers. This one you just turn the gas on a little bit and press the button and it ignites, as you can see. Then you just shut it off by turning the valve again. So we're going to take a little bit of either sugar in the raw or just some more granulated sugar, and we're just going to coat the very top with a nice semi-heavy layer of sugar. And again, this is the brulee part of creme brulee, so nice and even. And then we're going to take our torch we're just going to go ahead and caramelize that sugar. And just keep the torch moving. You'll see the sugar will start to melt. And you want to just sort of keep it moving because you don't want it in one spot. You want to point the torch away a little bit. So you'll burn the sugar, or I'm sorry, burn the custard underneath the sugar. You're technically burning the sugar here to caramelize it. And you can see I'm doing it in little short bursts just to melt the sugar. Now that the sugar is completely melted, you don't want to touch that sugar until it sets because it's very, very hot. That sugar right there is in its caramel stage, which is already upwards around the high 300s or even 400 degrees. So if you touch that caramel while it's still hasn't set, that will stick to your fingers and give you a very bad burn. So you do not want to touch it. So that caramel, because we're not introducing any liquids to the caramel like cream or butter or anything, that caramelized sugar will harden immediately and turn into a nice crust on the top of the creme brulee. By this point, it should be nice and set. I'm still not going to touch it yet, but as you can see, it's got a nice crust, and that gives you sort of a contrast between the cool, creamy custard and the crispy, crunchy, sweet topping from the caramelized sugar. As you can see, it's like glass now. It's like glass. If you can hear that. But I'm going to cut into that, and the idea is then you break through the sugar. Now in this case, because the custard hasn't set yet, that sugar just basically sank into that really soft custard because it's still warm on the inside. But as you can see, this creme brulee is nice, velvety, smooth, and if we allowed it to sit overnight, it would that sugar wouldn't have sank when I tried cutting through there. It would have just cracked like glass, and then it would allow you to expose then this beautiful, delicious custard. Enjoy. So again, just to recap that technique and procedure, because again, it's not a lot of ingredients, it's more of a technique and procedure than anything. It was just 4 ingredients: heavy cream, sugar, egg yolks, and vanilla. It's a procedure that we have to pay close attention to here. Everything from properly separating our egg yolks from our egg whites, properly scalding our heavy cream, properly introducing our heavy cream to the egg yolks so we don't scramble them or curdle them, and then again baking them in a water bath and in an oven that's about 300 degrees to 325, and for about, I want to say, 35 minutes for this batch. The problem I ran into with this batch and it getting some color was the fact that I made a lot less units than I usually do. So I should have shortened the cook time or even reduced the temperature of the oven. Low and slow is your friend in a custard case. In this case, again, I made less units, so they cooked a lot faster. The more I have in the oven, the slower it's going to cook in the oven. The longer it will take. Sometimes, if you have a lot of units in there, it'll feel like it's taking an eternity. Don't rush it. Don't keep peeking. Again, you just want it to set. You want it to move in a mass like soft jello as opposed to just a cup of fluid or water. But low and slow is your friend. You can set a timer for a batch like this. You can set a timer for about 30 minutes. You'll want to start checking them after about 30 minutes. But it will take about 35 minutes. I want to say, again, I set a timer for 45. I should have pulled them out about 8 to 10 minutes sooner. They would have done and let them rest. And again, I strongly suggest letting them cool, then refrigerate them overnight before you eat them. You can eat them like this, warm or slightly warm if you can't wait and you want to dig into them, but they are 100 times better if you let them sit and set overnight in the refrigerator. Again, when we caramelize the top and we cut into that top sank on me because of the fact that the custard was still warm in the center and very soft and not completely set because we didn't allow it to cool overnight. But I guarantee you that it will be that much more delicious the next day after it refrigerates for 24 hours.